Hello, and welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast all about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner, and I'm a judge on the Missouri Court of Appeals, the Southern District in Springfield, Missouri. We hope you've been enjoying our podcast. If you've liked what you've seen, don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on all your various avenues of choice. Make sure you're dropping those comments to us so that we can have that feedback and we can maybe address those things on future episodes. Don't forget also to like and subscribe to the Missouri Supreme Court's Facebook and Instagram page, as well as our new Missouri Courts Facebook and Instagram pages. There you can find out all sorts of wonderful information about our court system and the wonderful people that constitute that system as well. Joining me on today's episode, I have an incredible guest with me today. Folks that have listened to this podcast regularly know that I, having grown up in a smaller town here in Missouri and having been a judge in a more rural area in Missouri, always like talking to judges who work in the bigger cities, who work in the bigger areas of our state where they handle large caseloads and have lots of things going on. I have a judge like that today that certainly I want to talk about those things with. But the fun thing also to me about our guest today is that he is a recent appointee to the bench. Just in May of 2025, became a judge, leaving behind a very successful, very long career in private practice. And I want to talk to him a little bit about what it is that draws a private practice attorney with an outstanding career and an outstanding resume like his, what it is that would motivate him and draw him to becoming a member of our judiciary. I am very excited to have Judge Jeff McPherson joining me today from St. Louis County. Judge McPherson, welcome to the pod. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm appreciative of you being here today. As I led in with the introduction, you are now a circuit judge in St. Louis County. Tell folks how long you've been a circuit judge and what all that entails.
It was on May 1 that I got the job, and so as of November 1, that's 6 months on the job.
I tell people all the time that judge time is very much like dog years, and that on calendar it may not seem like a lot, but to judges it seems like forever. So I certainly understand that concept.
Oh, if any time you're doing anything in the first blush of something new, it seems strange. And then when you do it for a little while, and it doesn't take very long, it feels like this is my job now, and this is what I'm doing. So it feels normal in a way I didn't expect it to feel in 6 months. And so that's a bit of a comfort that it feels more normal than I expected it to.
And that's great. And certainly I can vouch for that as well, having had a couple of different jobs now in the judiciary. That 6-month timetable is about the average, and that it always takes about 6 months for you to figure out who the people are you're working with and the parameters of what you're doing. And so I'm really excited to hear that you've made that adjustment and that things seem to be working well.
Oh, yeah, it is an adjustment. You're right. I was in private practice until quite recently. And so the day is different than my days in the law firm. I was in the last 10 or 15 years, I worked on a lot of appeals, probably more than I worked on circuit court cases. That's a different timeline than you get in the circuit court. It's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. In my last job, I could type a brief from midnight to 4 o'clock in the morning, or I could write a brief from anywhere. There would be times when I would take a trip somewhere and I would spend the off hours at the hotel typing a brief or working on an argument or something like that. There's not really any of that in the current job. In the current job, you're in the office. I had a fella come in a minute ago looking for a time for a TRO. No, I didn't have a lot of emergency meetings in my last job. On the other hand, in this job, I get maybe 10 emails a week when it used to be that I would get dozens of emails a day. It's in this job, I've not gotten any of those emails at 11 o'clock at night telling me that there's going to be a conference call at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's been a real lifestyle change.
Certainly, when I've talked to people who were practitioners who have moved to the bench, one of the things they always talk about is they like having the ability to set the schedule. As an attorney, you sometimes are following along with whatever schedule the court has, and that move to judge, it's freeing being able to be the one to set that schedule from time to time.
The docket, yes. I get to the office by 7 almost every day. So I'm here from about 7 to at least about 5 every day. It's been a long time since I had a job where I was probably a clerk the last time. I was punching the clock every day like that.
And certainly as a judge, as a private practice attorney, certainly you had clients that you dealt with and you had to meet with clients and correspond with them by email and phone and such. But I'm guessing the volume of people that you interact with on a daily basis has gone up substantially since you became a circuit judge as well.
The criminal docket especially is quite a volume business. So there are dozens of cases several days a week. I was talking to one of my colleagues who said, "Hey, can we talk about something?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "First, I have these 108 criminal cases on the docket." And the 9 o'clock docket got over at about 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It's like that on Thursdays around here. A lot of us are like that it's just all day. And so that is a change. It's hard for somebody like me who's never had a criminal docket before to get my head around the kind of the lack of time you have to prep for the hearings, the lack of time you have to prep for each of the individual matters that's going to be on the docket. I feel like I still have time to prep for all the civil cases. There are fewer of them, and I'm more comfortable with the work. But the criminal cases have been the biggest adjustment.
No doubt. I was a private practice attorney before I became a judge, primarily did civil law just like you. And so the criminal piece of it was absolutely the biggest adjustment for me. And as you said, it's the volume and the speed at which you have to handle criminal cases because there are just so many of them. I certainly appreciate how difficult that transition is. How have you found going from a job in which you were more focused on the work side of it and not really interacting as much with people? How have you enjoyed having so many people to interact with on a daily basis?
Oh, it's fantastic. It's something I haven't had a chance to do. When I was in college, I worked my way through college working at a toy store, an actual retail job. So it was all different people all the time and all public interaction. And this job is the first job I've had since then, where I'm meeting new people, solving their problems, making some of them quite unhappy, but resolving issues with them back to back to back every day. So it's fun. It's never boring. I don't know what you could say about this job you didn't like, but I could never say that it was boring. In fact, one of our colleagues on the bench, when I got this job, said, "McPherson, circuit judge is the best job in the practice of law. It's certainly the best job in the judiciary." And that's been my experience. This is a fantastic job.
That's awesome. And I'm so glad to hear that the transition is going well and that you're enjoying the job to this point. You mentioned growing up, and that kind of transitions me into the question I ask everybody who comes on to tell the story a little bit. How did you get interested in the law?
I don't come from a family of lawyers. I'm a first generation college graduate, definitely a first generation lawyer, probably a last generation lawyer. None of my children would ever want to be lawyers. I was born in East St. Louis, Illinois, grew up in Granite City, Illinois, and I can tell you that in St. Louis, if you're practicing law, the first question, if you're doing anything, the first question is always, where did you go to high school? And I get to tell people Granite City North. As far as I know, there are 2 people in the practice of law in the entire state who went to Granite City North. And one of those, my classmate, Judge Terry Burke, who's a circuit judge in the city of St. Louis. And I think Terry would tell you that when you say Granite City North, that doesn't open a whole ton of doors for you. And Terry and I went to high school together. We both went to Southern Illinois at Edwardsville, so not the most prestigious college in the world, and went to St. Louis University. As I'm thinking about it, Terry and I have had very similar careers. And we did it the same way, except timing-wise. Terry wanted to be a lawyer and a judge since we were kids, and she's perfect for the job. I got a degree in English and looked around and tried to think of wise and prudent ways to feed myself with my English degree. Turns out I couldn't find a whole ton. People kept saying, shoot, you should go to law school. And I checked into the requirements for law school. It turns out you just have to be able to read and write. And I had both of those. And I went to law school. And it turns out that it was mostly by luck, mostly by not having anything better to do. But it ended up being perfect for me. I got the best grades of my life in law school. I really fell into it because it hooked me into a couple of things that I already loved. I already loved reading. I loved research. I've been writing for a long time. And so law school was perfect for me. It was a lot easier for me probably than it needed to be. And so I somehow miraculously got a job at a pretty good law firm, this big law firm in St. Louis. Somehow hired the kid from Granite City, Illinois, and it's worked out fantastically. I got to meet some fantastic people. I might tell you about some of those in terms of the journey, but it really is not, I'm not one of those people from a family of lawyers. And I'm not like when you hear an astronaut being interviewed, they always say, I always wanted to be an astronaut. So I studied astrophysics and then went to astronaut school. That's not me. I just read a lot of books and I wrote a lot. And I ended up with an English degree by accident. After I had been in college for a couple of years, one of the advisors says, hey, genius, don't you think you should pick a major? And I said, yeah, that seems prudent. And so I said, what do I have the most credits in? Because I was just going to school to be going to school and taking stuff that I thought was interesting. They said, you have the most credits in English, the second most in history, the third most in political science. And I said, so English then? And he said, yeah, here, go, get out of my office. And so that's how I got an English degree, just because the math worked out. It really is a happy accident that I ended up being a lawyer at all.
You were the first person I have ever talked to who got better grades in law school than they did at any other level of their academic careers. That is truly exceptional. And congratulations to you.
Oh, not congratulations. That's just crippling anxiety talking, right? Because I worked all the way through college. So I was working every day. There were times when I had to go to school part-time. So it took me probably 7 years to graduate from college. And then when I went to law school, I was sure that everyone there was smarter than I was. I was sure that everybody was better equipped. They came from better lawyer families, and all of that was true. And so the only thing I had was the ability to work and the anxiety and the fear to fail. Also, there was this real cute gal who was getting a teaching degree at Southeast Missouri, and I wanted that gal to marry me. I couldn't really flunk out of law school because she wanted me to go to law school and be able to help feed her. I didn't want to lose this one chance. And so I worked in law school when I was a 1L especially. I worked all day, Monday through Friday, all day Saturday and half day Sunday studying. And so at the end of that first semester, I was doing quite well, enough that I got this summer job working at this big law firm miraculously. But I was still afraid in the second semester, and so I did about as well. And then I worked at the law firm, and it turns out that working in a law firm is fantastic. Smart people, interesting stuff to do. The law firm where I worked was kind enough to let me actually do stuff. And I thought, shoot, this is it for me. I love practicing law. This is great. And so after that, my grades went to heck because I realized I had a job waiting for me at the law firm. I also had a clerkship offer too. So I had a clerkship and a job. And so after that, I spent the rest of my law school years trying to figure out how to be a good lawyer. I worked at Legal Services of Eastern Missouri, where they gave me clients and let me go to court as a Rule 13 certified student. And I did long internships for a couple of really great judges so I could see what it was like to work in a court. And so I did all those things that were not school. So great grades as a 1L, which are the only grades that really matter when you're a lawyer. And then fairly crummy grades the rest of my law school career as I started to figure out what it is I wanted to do in the law.
And you mentioned the clerkship, and that was actually the next thing I was going to ask you about. So you graduate law school from a SLU, and do you go to the clerkship from there, or do you go back to the firm and work for a little while?
And so what had happened was when I was a 1L, I worked with the great Ann Buckley, who's a lawyer from a family of lawyers in St. Louis. The Buckleys are fantastic lawyers. Ann had been a clerk for Judge Jerry Smith on the Court of Appeals, who was the senior man there and a great person and a great lawyer. I got an internship working for him. I also got an internship working with Judge Theodore McMillian on the Eighth Circuit. Fantastic person. Great to work with. I mostly worked for his clerk, Marilyn Tanaka, who was a great lawyer and honestly maybe the person most responsible for my ability to practice law. She was generous without being overly kind about it and really made me a better writer and a better thinker. So I had worked for Judge McMillian, and Judge Smith knew Judge Ann Covington on the Supreme Court of Missouri, and so he put in a kind word for me. And so I spent a year clerking for Judge Covington when she was the Chief Justice at the Supreme Court right out of law school. Very formative experience. I didn't realize at the time that Judge Covington was an absolute Hall of Famer and just a wonderful person to me and a great experience to work with her. And so before I practiced law, I had worked with all of these fantastic judges, which really I think was a big leg up for me when I started practicing.
And certainly I understand the importance of all of that. I myself was a clerk at the Supreme Court, actually with one of your former coworkers, Judge Price, was who I was a clerk for a year or so. Tell folks at home who are listening to this or who might not understand like I do, what is the real benefit? What is the real thing that you think that as a young attorney fresh out of law school, what was the thing that you think that you really got from doing that clerkship, from getting that experience and having that opportunity?
There's a lot of benefits. One is you get to see how judges think. I was in the chambers of one judge, but down the hall from 6 others. And this was the Supreme Court. So right. The golden age, to me, the golden age of the Supreme Court was when Judge Covington was on there with Judge Benton, Judge Price, Judge Limbaugh, Judge Robertson, Judge Holstein, whom we lost not too long ago. The actual Elwood Thomas was a judge on the Supreme Court when I was working there. Anybody who's younger than we are may not realize those names. Those are Hall of Famers in the practice of law in Missouri. And so I got to work with them somewhat, hear figure out how they think, got to know them a little bit. That is such a valuable thing. Another thing is when you're a clerk, you get to go to the arguments all the time. And so when I was interning for Judge Smith in the Court of Appeals, Judge McMillian in the Eighth Circuit, and when I was a clerk at the Supreme Court, I don't know how many oral arguments I saw. It was many. And when you're in the back row with all the rest of the clerks, you're also seeing lawyers work. And so you're picking up lessons, both positive lessons, boy, I hope I can do that. But what you can really accumulate are negative lessons, things where you think, oh, okay, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to walk away from the lectern. So microphone's not picking me up, so the court can't hear me. I'm never going to put up big display boards that block the court from being able to see me while I'm making my argument. I'm not going to put up big display boards with such tiny print that no one can read them. So you pick up so many lessons when you're doing that. But then maybe the chief thing for me was being a clerk at the Supreme Court, as half of what you do is write opinions mostly, and the other half is review transfer applications and writ petitions. And transfer applications and writ petitions are a crash course in the Missouri Rules of Civil Procedure. Every rule that's in the book comes up in transfer applications, writ petitions, and also tons of cases about matters like venue and personal jurisdiction, change of judge. And so you had opportunities multiple times a week to learn something new. And all of those, if you're practicing law in the litigation practice, all of those are things that you could use going forward. So it gave me a comfort level when I started practicing law. And so I felt like I knew some things. When I started working at the law firm after my clerkship was over, I was walking down the hall, and the great Tom Weaver, one of the great appellate lawyers in our state, was walking down the hall past me, and he said, "Hey, are you the guy from the Supreme Court?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you know anything about transfer applications?" And I said, thinking to myself, that's the only thing I know. And I said, "Yes, sir, I do." And so he said, "I'm working on transfer application. You want to help?" And I said, "Yeah, I sure do." And so I wrote this transfer application for him. And it's one of the highlights of my career. It happened in the first 2 minutes of my career. I wrote a transfer application for Tom, and he changed a comma to a semicolon or a colon to an at. He changed one piece of punctuation and then signed it and filed it, and it got sustained. And so my first transfer application got granted. And so after that, I was working with Tom Weaver on appeals, in addition to all the other stuff I was doing, all because of the background that I had from the Supreme Court.
It's an outstanding experience. And certainly if there's any young lawyers that are listening to this, I would highly encourage them, even if it's not a Supreme Court clerkship, working for a judge at any level is a wonderful opportunity to gain experience on not just the law, but how to be a lawyer. As you said, you review all the writings from hundreds of lawyers, and you see as much bad stuff as you see good stuff. And I, as a young lawyer, learned a lot more from the bad stuff than I ever did from the good. Like you said, the things to avoid, the things not to do. I'm glad that you had such a positive experience with that. And I think that is the type of experience that young attorneys and attorneys that are thinking about doing a clerkship could have and should have. They get the opportunity to work with judges.
It's invaluable. And you can only do it once. There's a time after you're out of law school and before you're having kids and paying for mortgages and whatnot. There's a little time there when you can do it. And if you can and if you want to, you should, because really that's an opportunity you don't get. It's the best apprenticeship that we have in the law, in a way that if you're a medical student, you have a period of additional training before you're a real doctor. We don't have that in the law. You can get a law degree and then eke out a license and then go do whatever you want without any kind of guidance or leadership. And so it's such a valuable opportunity to do that and to get to work with people like your mentor, Judge Ray Price, after he retired from the court, came to work at our firm. And so he was right down the hall from me, and we worked together since we were 10 years or more. It's such an invaluable experience to get to work with him. I cherish that kind of mentoring relationship that started when I was already grown and already been practicing law. It was a nice reminder that you can always keep learning.
I'm grateful that you had that opportunity. It was a formative experience for me as well. I'm appreciative that you were willing to share that story with us today. So your clerkship at the Supreme Court, you start in private practice. It sounds like very quickly you got to working on appellate work. Was appellate work your primary focus when you were in private practice, or did you also do some courtroom work as well?
Oh, no. For the first 10 or 15 years of my career, I was mostly working in circuit courts and federal district courts. But I had started working on appeals right from the outset, and the firm was so great to me. I wanted to be a good lawyer, and I wanted to work on appeals, and they knew that, and they let me try. And they let me, like, for example, I started working in the firm in August or September of 1995. And the first appeal I argued for a paying client was in April of 96. I'd been working there not too long now. This is not a major appeal. This is not Brown v. Board or anything. And it was in the second district of the Illinois Appellate Court. There are 5 districts of the Illinois Appellate Court. District 1 is the Chicago area, really only covers Cook County. District 2 is the entire rest of northern Illinois. To argue an appeal in the second district, you have to drive literally within a stone's throw of Wisconsin. And so that's why they let me do it, because it was all day in the car to argue this $10,000 case. But I worked on it like it was Brown v. Board, and we won, so thank goodness. So they let me keep going. But by the time I came to be a partner in 2001 or 2002, I'd probably argued 30 or 40 appeals for paying clients. And so they let me do stuff in a way that I've always appreciated. My partners were very good to me. I was doing that, and probably in the last 10 or 15 years, that was the major focus of my practice. But it was grounded in all the work I had done in circuit courts for years and years. There's nothing like being in front of a circuit judge to give you an appreciation later when you're working on appeals to understand what the record is really telling you, what the transcript is really telling you about what happens in the court.
Yeah, that's a fabulous point. And actually, I want to ask you about that a little bit, but I want to back up to something that you mentioned. You mentioned handling this appeal in Illinois, which brings me to something that I think that a lot of people may not realize is that lawyers, when they get their law degree and they get licensed, they aren't necessarily licensed to practice everywhere in the country. They're licensed by state. If you have a license in Missouri, you can only practice law in Missouri. So by practicing in Illinois, I'm guessing you were licensed in both states, correct?
Oh, yeah. Until just a few months ago, I was licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Tennessee. When I got this job, I figured I probably wouldn't be practicing too much more in Illinois and Tennessee, so I relinquished those licenses. Tennessee wasn't that hard because the rules are a lot similar to the federal rules. Illinois is very hard because the rules are different, and they have very extensive statutory requirements that are sometimes in conflict with the rules. I am very comfortable with the Missouri rules, and so I was always uncomfortable practicing in Illinois. I didn't mind relinquishing my license there, but it was a good experience to learn new things almost every time I had to appear in an Illinois court.
Now, you didn't have to get a law degree from Illinois, clearly, in order to be an Illinois licensed attorney. Did you have to take their bar, or were you able to waive in through what we would call a process of reciprocity?
Oh, no, the law firm where I worked, our office, if you look this way, you're looking at Missouri. If you look this way, you're looking across the river at Illinois. So I got my Missouri license and then immediately got my Illinois license. I think I took the February bar after I got a license in October in Missouri. I was licensed in Illinois for as long as I've been in Missouri.
Excellent. And after my clerkship, I ended up in Kansas City. And so I had to be licensed in both Missouri and Kansas. And so I had a similar experience in that I had to take the Missouri bar, I passed that, and then I have to take the Kansas bar to get my Kansas license. Nowadays, it seems like that the rules with respect to waiving into other jurisdictions, if you are a licensed attorney in another state, seem to be a little more liberal. I guess I would say they're a little more forgiving than they were back when we were younger attorneys. And so maybe we don't have as many people taking the bar today as we did back then.
I'm not one of those people who wants everyone else to have it as tough as I did. And not every young lawyer needs to walk uphill in the snow to school. So I'm glad that you can do that. But when I was younger, you had to take the test. It was a good experience. It was a trip to Chicago. When somebody gives you a free trip to Chicago, you should take it.
Absolutely. No question about that. In your time in private practice and you start working on these cases where you're working in state court, you're working in federal court, you're also handling some appeals, how did you balance that? Because certainly I know, and our listeners may not know, that there are different ways that you practice law in those 3 areas, in state court, in federal court, and then on appeal. There's different rules that apply. There's different standards that apply that you're arguing to, things that you're looking for. How did you balance all of that in your practice?
Oh, when you're doing it, you're not thinking of it that way. Especially when you're a young associate, somebody says, hey, do this, and you say, yes, sir. And so off you go. And when you're a young lawyer, I bet you had this experience. It would happen all the time. Somebody would say, hey, there's a motion in Scotland County. And it's tomorrow, and it's at 8 o'clock. Go get them. And so I don't know how many county seats I've been to, not all of them, but a lot of them, a lot of the ones in the eastern half of Missouri I've been to. It's a great experience. And it's not a matter of balancing your practice. It's also not a matter of balancing your time. When you're young, what you have to offer is your energy and your time, because A, you work cheap, and B, you're not picky. If somebody told me to do something, I would say, yes, sure, I'll go do that motion, or I'll go to that hearing, or whatever it is. But then as time goes on and you're not as cheap in terms of your billing rate, and as you get some experience in different things, then you funnel into things that you're better at. And so I funneled into governmental cases about the constitutionality of the tax and the validity of the ordinance and whether the redevelopment is authorized by the law, and then appeals in cases of all kinds. And so I've argued appeals in governmental cases and tax cases and med-mal cases and every other kind of thing. Those ended up being the general areas of my practice: governmental, sunshine law, and then appeals in every kind of case. And those were complementary because to a great extent, the governmental cases did not have a whole lot of fact disputes. They were legal cases, and appeals very generally, if you're lucky, there aren't any fact disputes because you're not going to win the appeal if you're the appellant and there's a fact dispute. And those ended up being complementary. So probably the last 10 or 15 years of my career, those were the things I worked on mostly.
And how long were you in private practice before you became a judge?
I think it would have been 30 years if I had made it to August. But I got this appointment in May, 29 and a half years.
So almost 30 years in private practice, a very successful private practice at a big firm in St. Louis, very successful as a private practice attorney. What is it that after all these years in private practice, after the success you've had as an attorney, what is it that made you think about wanting to become a judge? And what is it that kind of drew you to the bench?
I welcome the opportunity to serve in a new role. I hope I had lived a life of service, not paid public service, but I hope I had lived a life of service. And I viewed it as the same thing. I'd been involved in a lot of community and charitable and bar and legal organizations. The judiciary is one I had not been involved in. And I felt like I had some skills and some experience that would be useful. I was encouraged by some of my colleagues here in the circuit court who said, "Hey, McPherson, you should apply to be a circuit judge." They thought that somebody with my experience might be useful. My experience is different than a lot of folks who become circuit judges. A lot of them get there by being prosecutors initially. A lot of them get there by being kind of family lawyers, that there aren't that many folks with kind of a substantial civil practice who step into being a judge. And I fancied that I might be able to add some value that way, to bring a different kind of background to the court than, and there's some fantastic lawyers who become judges on this court alone. I'm not saying I'm unique in that respect, but I hoped I would bring some breadth and depth of experience in an area that's not really overrepresented among the judges on the court.
And I think that's absolutely right. And certainly for those that have been following this podcast know of all the judges we've been talking to over the last year or so, everyone comes from a different background. They all have different strengths and weaknesses. They all have areas of practice that they worked in or areas as a judge that they focused on before they elevated up the chain. And it's that variety of experiences and that variety of knowledge, I think, that really makes our judiciary really function as well as it does, because we have people that have knowledge, and judges have the opportunity to spend time together and consult with each other outside of work. And we have the ability to lean on that knowledge from time to time. And so that's a wonderful aspect of our judiciary. I'm glad you're now a part of that. We have your expertise to lean on, that the folks in St. Louis County now have that expertise to lean on. That is very important. And it surprised me as I've gone through this process so far of this podcast and talking to judges. So many of them that I have talked to this point are more in your boat and my boat, in that first generation lawyers. They didn't come from a family of lawyers. They didn't have any lawyers in their family. It was something that just reached out to them and appealed to them. And while certainly I understand that there are lots of lawyers out there who come from a legacy of lawyers and judges the same, but there's a lot more people out there who have just found their way to the law through just sheer education and sheer passion, like you and I, than I ever thought there were. And that's been a really fascinating discovery for me as I've undertaken this process.
So how many judges do you have left to go? If you're going to do every judge in the Missouri judiciary, how many do you have left to check off?
Just a couple hundred. It's not a problem. And at the rate we're cranking these out at one every 2 weeks, I should be done by the time I'm around 80. So it'll be perfect.
Hey, can I tell you about one of my things? I know you're involved in the civic education quite a bit.
Absolutely.
I've welcomed the opportunity to be involved in that. I got a chance to speak to a group from the St. Louis County Library. Your neighbor, Krista Hogan, invited me down to speak to some folks at Drury University. I always welcome the opportunity to speak. And so the Civic Education Committee is great in the way that it gets judges out, especially for that. But let me talk to you also about the state high school mock trial competition.
Yes.
That is something that I've been working on for a really long time. When I was a lawyer and I was on the board for the last I don't know, 10 years or so. It's just a fantastic civic education and citizenship education opportunity for the high schoolers. And I would welcome anybody who wants to give me a call. If you're not involved in your area in Springfield, there's a great critical mass of folks involved in the high school mock trial. We're doing real well in St. Louis, real well in Kansas City. We would love to be able to expand the program to other areas, especially mid-Missouri would be a great area. Certainly southwest Missouri would be a great area. Anytime, if you have a critical mass of high schools to compete against each other for football or basketball, those same schools could compete against each other in the mock trial. And for that, we need lawyers and judges to volunteer as judges and volunteers at the competitions. If anybody wants to talk about getting involved in the state high school mock trial, I would love to talk with you about that. That's a program that's very near and dear to me. And I think it really does give the judiciary a chance to get out into the community and really provide a real advantage to the students and their families.
It's an outstanding program and one that I participated in when I was in high school back in the day. And there's lots of different programs around the state that do high school mock trials. To any educators that we have listening who might be interested, maybe they don't have this at their school and they might be interested. How many kids do they need to field a team?
Per team, if you had 10 kids, you'd be all set, because that's about how many kids it takes. You need kids to play lawyers and kids to play witnesses. And so if you had 10, if you had 20, for sure, you could field a couple of teams. And the schools where they do it, it becomes entrenched. It becomes part of the extracurriculars that the kids do. And the parents who get involved, sometimes they'll stay involved for years after their kids are no longer doing it. All it takes is somebody on the school staff who's willing to be the sponsor and somebody in the community who's willing to be the coach. After that, we can work with you for every other thing. If you want to talk to me about it, you can. Krista Hogan in Springfield is a great resource for it. Anybody who wants to talk about it, please give one of us a call. We'd be glad to get you involved.
That's outstanding. And it is a wonderful program. I participated both as a student and then had the pleasure of doing some coaching for various high school teams in mid-Missouri at various times. I'm very appreciative of the work that you do with that project. You're right. It's an outstanding outreach for our judiciary, for our lawyers and our judges to be involved in projects like that and really help people understand the law. What was something that you thought was going to be true that you have now come to find out that isn't actually true about being a judge?
I'm surprised by the extent to which I don't have a name anymore. I'm just judge. There are plenty of people whom I've met who may not even know my first name. And it's not isolating, but it's really only among the judges that you are yourself to everybody else. So that's been a bit of a transition. I'm surprised how much funnier my jokes are now I'm a judge because they were fantastic before. And the human adjustment's been a bit of a surprise for me.
Yeah. And certainly too, the adjustment with your former colleagues, with attorneys that you've worked with for years and years, and now you're in a different position and they're actually in some instances coming into your court and having to make arguments to you. That can be an adjustment, but it's certainly one we're all professionals and navigate forward and figure out a way.
Yeah, and I try to treat everybody equally. If I know you, I don't know you. It's all about the case and it's all about the motion, the ruling that's being requested. That transition has been very hard. And it is surprising. Sometimes people walk in and they're surprised and realize you're a judge now.
What's been the most surprising thing to you about the job so far, or about your experience with the job?
Oh, the surprise, honestly, was that it's doable. I was afraid it might be a little overwhelming. I'd not had a lot of criminal practice experience, which is to say practically none. And so when you get this job, I have a civil criminal docket. It's probably 70 or 80% criminal. And so I was surprised by the extent to which most of the decisions that you have to make in the criminal docket in the course of a week, most of those aren't truly legal decisions. There aren't a lot of thorny legal decisions. They're mostly about how much you're going to set this bond, or are you going to reduce this bond, or when are you going to set the trial. They're all kind of bite-sized, practical decisions, which is comforting because I'm an experienced person. I've been making decisions for a long time, and I've been involved in the law for a long time. So it's comforting to me that the decisions that you're forced to make on a very regular basis are ones that rely more on common sense than on granular knowledge of some particular area of the law. So that's been surprisingly good.
And being a newer judge, you come to the bench with some fresher eyes, having not been on that side of the bench for an extended period of time. What is it that you see coming into the judiciary now for a little over a year? Are there things that you see? Is there anything that you see that you think, hey, this is the way we're doing things, but are there things that you think we can improve?
I don't know if I'm in a position to improve the judiciary. I will tell you, though, that everybody in your practice of law, in your life, everybody's always fighting the last war, right? When I got this job, I decided I would not do any of the things I hated when I was practicing law. We used to have little kids and I had to get them to school and everything. Getting to court at 8 o'clock was murder. So in Division 16, we don't start before 9. I'll give you a special setting. If somebody comes and begs and says, let's have it at 8 or 8:30, that's fine. But ordinarily, we don't start before 9. I try to set things up so that we don't get the thing where you're ready to argue your motion and you get to court and you say, Judge, ready to take up my motion. My worthy opponent says, I'd like to write suggestions in opposition to this. Can we come back in 6 weeks? And so I try to avoid that by when I see that there's a substantial civil motion, I'll say, okay, we're going to continue this hearing. You have leave to file suggestions in opposition and you have leave to file a reply. And then we're going to have a hearing so that we kind of front load all of that work so that nobody gets frustrated and nobody gets surprised. And so I try to do things like that to make it so that McPherson, the lawyer, would have been happy appearing in front of McPherson, the judge.
Very good. And I always ask the newer practitioners who have just recently joined the bench, not just on the podcast, but when I'm talking to them in person, how have you found the switch in changing the hats, I guess I would say? As a private practice attorney, you're an advocate. You're an advocate for your client and for a particular position in a case. But as a judge, you have to put on the hat of the neutral. You're there to call the balls and the strikes. You're not on anyone's side. Has that been a challenge, that transition?
One thing that I think my background has helped me with that particular thing is that when I was working on a lot of appeals for a long time, you have to be very analytical about the strengths and weaknesses of your arguments. You need to throw away the bad arguments and only focus on the good arguments. If your brief has more than 2 or 3 points, you're really courting disaster. So you have to be very disciplined about what's your argument and how you advance it. And so bringing that to this job, it's easier for me to be, I think, more analytical about what's happening in front of me. Are you meeting your elements? Are you putting on evidence that supports what you want to say? And so I hope that my background gives me an opportunity to be more analytical about what's happening in front of me in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do if I had gotten this job 10 or 20 years ago.
Judge, last question I have for you, the same question I ask everybody. What's the best thing that you have seen lately? It could be a TV show, a movie, a sunset, a picture, whatever it is. What's the best thing you've seen lately?
The sky was really cool this morning when I took the dogs out. It was still dark. That was great. But probably the greatest thing I've seen lately. Did you see the World Series? That was fantastic.
I did.
It's really something to see those guys who are so great at what they do. I don't know how good you would have to be at anything to be as good at that thing as they are at baseball. It's really something to watch.
It's really impressive. And there's pressure in every sport, in every professional sport. But in my personal opinion, there is nothing that matches the pressure of playoff baseball just because they have so much time between when things happen to be thinking about it and to have that pressure build up and the games take so long and all those things happen. It's not like football or hockey or basketball where things are moving and you don't really have a lot of time to think about what you're doing or what you're trying to accomplish. Baseball, it is always right there. You always have time to think about what this next at bat or what this next pitch means. And so for that very reason, I always marvel at the professionalism of the players and how well they deliver in one of the most pressure-packed situations that I can imagine.
There's that, of course, you have time to dwell on your last mistake and you have time to be afraid. But then the ball's in play and there's a liner coming at you and you have to be heady enough to make the play and then a snap throw to second base to pick the guy off who's leaning the wrong way. It's that kind of thing. It's periods of stress and boredom punctuated by instantaneous decisions. It's like practicing law.
Very much like being a litigator. Judge McPherson, thank you so much for being with us today. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and talk with us today. I wish you the best of luck in St. Louis County. And certainly if you need any help with the mock trial project, don't hesitate to reach out and let me know.
Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. Good luck with the other 200 judges.
I'm going to try to track them down. That's my next project. I do want to thank everybody who's listened to us today. We hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe to us. All those places you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else you're getting it. Also, don't forget to check us out on YouTube where you can get full color videos of myself and our fabulous guests talking about all the things that we've discussed. Don't forget to leave us a comment. Let us know how we're doing, things you like, things you don't like. Maybe we can address some of your questions and concerns on a future episode. With nothing more to discuss today, this podcast will be adjourned. Thank you, folks.